Queen Margaret sat alone in the royal library, her fingers tracing the spine of an old leather book. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting golden patterns on the polished floor. Outside, the palace grounds stretched far and wide, perfectly maintained, every hedge trimmed, every flower blooming in its season. But inside her chest, Queen Margaret's heart felt like a garden overrun with weeds. Her son, Prince Thomas, had turned 28 last month. The kingdom expected him to marry soon. Noble families from across the land had been sending letters, making requests, seeking audiences. Every week brought new faces, new daughters, new hopes from ambitious parents. Beautiful girls arrived in expensive cars, wearing designer dresses, speaking with practiced elegance. But something was always wrong. Something was always missing. Queen Margaret could feel it in her bones, see it in her son's disappointed eyes after each meeting. Queen Margaret herself had not been born into royalty. Her father had been a school teacher in a small town 3 hours from the capital. She had grown up in a modest home where dinner was sometimes just bread and vegetable soup. She had known what it meant to wear the same dress to church every Sunday because it was the only good one she owned. She had understood struggle, sacrifice, and the value of genuine kindness. When she met King Frederick 29 years ago, she had been working as a tutor for children in the palace town. He had been a young prince then, walking through the market one afternoon when he heard her teaching children under a tree because the small school building had collapsed. He had stopped to listen, captivated not by her beauty alone, though she had been lovely, but by her patience, her joy, and the way she made learning feel like magic to those poor children. Their courtship had been unusual. He had visited her repeatedly, sometimes in disguise, watching how she lived her daily life. He saw her care for her aging father, share food with neighbors, and speak with respect to everyone. When he proposed marriage, his mother had opposed strongly, but he had been firm in his choice. Queen Margaret remembered those early years of marriage with both joy and pain. Some nobles had looked down on her, whispering behind her back, calling her the teacher queen with mocking tones. But King Frederick had stood beside her always, defending her, supporting her, loving her through every challenge. Slowly, through genuine kindness and wisdom, she had won hearts. The common folk loved her because she understood their struggles. Even the nobles eventually respected her because she governed with fairness. King Frederick had often told her, "You are the best decision I ever made." Those words had sustained her through every difficulty. And when he fell ill 3 years ago, when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, he had used his final strength to speak to her about their son. She could still see that moment clearly, as if it had happened yesterday. King Frederick lay weak in the royal bed, his once strong body now frail. She held his hand, trying to pour her strength into him, knowing it was futile. "Margaret," he had whispered, his voice barely audible. She leaned closer, her tears falling. "Promise me something about Thomas." She had nodded, unable to speak through her grief and fear. "Find him a wife who will love him when the crown is heavy," King Frederick continued, each word requiring great effort. "Find him someone whose kindness does not depend on what she can gain. Find him a woman whose heart is true, like yours was true to me." He paused, struggling for breath, his eyes holding hers with desperate intensity. Those had been among his last words to her. 2 days later, he was gone, leaving her with a kingdom to help govern, a son to guide, and a promise that weighed heavier than any crown. That promise had become Queen Margaret's mission, her sacred duty to the man she had loved. But it was proving harder than she had ever imagined. The young women who came to meet Prince Thomas were polished and educated, beautiful and accomplished, yet something essential was always missing. She watched them carefully during visits. She saw how their eyes lingered on expensive decorations, how they calculated every word, how they treated servants. These were performances, not genuine character. Prince Thomas himself made the search more difficult because he had inherited his father's wisdom and his mother's kind heart. He was intelligent without arrogance, strong without cruelty, genuinely good in ways that were rare. He treated palace servants with the same courtesy he showed visiting dignitaries, remembering names, asking about families, caring about their well-being. After meeting each carefully selected young woman, he would sit with his mother in the evening and speak honestly about what he had observed. "Mother, she was beautiful and well-spoken," he might say. But when the maid accidentally brushed against a chair, the look on her face was pure disgust. She did not see a person who made a small mistake. She saw something beneath her that had dared to come too close. Or he would observe, "Mother, she spoke eloquently about charity work and helping the poor. But did you notice how she snapped her fingers at the servant to bring her tea? As if he were an animal to be commanded rather than a human being to be respected." Each observation confirmed what Queen Margaret already suspected. These young women were not suitable. Their refinement was only surface deep. Their kindness extended only to those who could benefit them. Their love would be conditional, political, empty of the depth that true marriage required. One particularly difficult evening, after yet another disappointing introduction, Queen Margaret dismissed all her attendants and sat alone in her private chambers. She removed the heavy crown from her head and placed it carefully on the dressing table. Looking at her reflection in the ornate mirror, she saw a woman of 53 years, her face marked by both joy and sorrow, wisdom and worry. Lines creased her forehead, gray streaked her dark hair. Her eyes looked tired from constant concern about her son's future. "Frederick," she whispered to the memory of her late husband, as she often did when feeling overwhelmed, "I am trying to keep my promise, but I do not know how to find what you ask for. These modern girls know the right words, all the proper manners, but their hearts remain untested." She trailed off, pressing her fingers against her temples where a headache was beginning to form. Outside her window, night had fallen completely. The palace grounds were dark except for scattered lights along the pathways guiding servants to their quarters. Somewhere in the distance, she heard laughter as workers finished their evening duties. That sound made her smile sadly. Those servants, with their simple lives and honest relationships, probably understood genuine love better than all the noble families combined. Unable to sleep, Queen Margaret rose from her chair and walked to the small private chapel attached to her chambers. It was a simple room, very different from the grand cathedral where public ceremonies were held. Here, there were only a few wooden benches, a plain altar, and a large window that revealed the star-filled night sky. She knelt slowly, her knees protesting against the hard stone floor, and folded her hands in prayer. The chapel felt peaceful, isolated from the rest of the palace, a place where she could be completely honest without worry of being overheard. "God," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. "I am a queen, but tonight I am simply a mother who does not know what to do. You blessed me with a good son who deserves a good wife. Now I need your help to find her. Show me where to look. Show me how to recognize her when I see her. Give me wisdom that my own mind cannot produce." She stayed there for a long time, praying with desperate sincerity, thinking about her dilemma, waiting for some kind of answer or guidance or sign. The candles flickered, the night deepened, and slowly, quietly, an idea began forming in her mind. The idea came not as a voice or a vision, but as a memory that surfaced with sudden clarity. Queen Margaret found herself remembering a day many years ago, before she married King Frederick, when she was still just a simple teacher. She had been walking home from a market, carrying vegetables for dinner, when she witnessed a scene that had stayed with her. A well-dressed woman was berating a street sweeper for accidentally brushing dirt near her expensive shoes. The woman's face had been twisted with contempt, her words sharp and cruel, cutting into the old man like knives. The street sweeper, elderly and bent from years of hard labor, had apologized repeatedly, his head bowed in shame and fear. Young Margaret, with no authority or status, had stepped forward anyway. "Madam, he has apologized sincerely," she had said quietly but firmly. Surely your expensive shoes can be cleaned, but his dignity, once you destroy it completely, cannot be so easily restored." The woman had turned her contempt toward Margaret then, looking her up and down with obvious disdain, seeing only a poor teacher with no importance. She had walked away in a huff without another word. But the elderly street sweeper had looked at Margaret with such profound gratitude, his eyes filled with tears, and had said in a trembling voice, "God bless you, young lady. Not many people see us as human beings." That memory triggered a realization so powerful that Queen Margaret gasped aloud in the quiet chapel, her hands gripping the bench in front of her. People revealed their true characters not when they were being watched and evaluated by someone important, but when they thought no one of significance was paying attention. Everyone could be kind to a queen because there was obvious incentive, potential reward, calculated advantage. Everyone could be respectful to a prince because it might lead to marriage, wealth, power, position. But how did these same people treat those they considered beneath them? How did they respond to beggars sleeping in doorways, servants carrying their bags, street cleaners sweeping their paths, vendors selling cheap goods? That was where the truth lived without disguise. That was where genuine character showed itself with brutal honesty. If she wanted to find a woman whose kindness did not depend on what she could gain, she needed to remove all possibility of gain. She needed to present herself as someone who had nothing to offer, nothing to give, nothing to promise. She needed to become, in the eyes of the world, completely worthless. The idea took fuller shape in her mind, wild and impossible and completely against every rule of royal protocol. What if she disguised herself as a beggar? Not as minor nobility traveling incognito, not as a middle-class merchant woman, but as the lowest of the low, the kind of person society trained itself to ignore. An old, poor woman sitting on the street with a begging bowl, dirty and desperate, invisible to the important and successful. Only then would she see people's hearts as they really were, stripped of performance and pretense. Only then could she identify someone whose compassion was not calculated, whose kindness flowed naturally regardless of who might be watching or what benefit might result. A woman who would show respect to a worthless beggar would certainly show respect to a prince. A woman who would share food with someone who could never repay her would certainly be generous as a princess. A woman who could see dignity in the lowest person would certainly treasure it in everyone. This was the test she needed. This was how she would fulfill her promise to Frederick. The idea terrified Queen Margaret even as it compelled her. Queens did not disguise themselves as beggars. It was undignified, potentially dangerous, completely unprecedented in the history of the kingdom. Her advisers would be horrified if they knew. The royal council would forbid it absolutely. Even Prince Thomas might think she had lost her mind to grief. There were risks she could barely calculate. What if someone recognized her? What if she was actually harmed on the streets? What if the whole plan failed and she found no one suitable? But the more she considered these objections, the more she realized they were rooted in fear and convention, not in wisdom. Sometimes the most important truths could only be discovered through the most unconventional methods. Sometimes breaking the rules was necessary to serve a higher purpose. Her late husband had asked her to find genuine goodness, and genuine goodness could not be found in controlled palace visits where everyone performed their best behavior. It could only be found in the raw, unguarded moments of everyday life. She had to do this. She had no other choice if she wanted to keep her promise and find the right wife for her son. The decision settled in her heart with quiet certainty. Before dawn broke the next morning, Queen Margaret moved silently through her private chambers. She had barely slept, her mind too active with planning and anticipation and lingering fear. Now, in the gray pre-dawn light, she opened an old wooden trunk that sat in the corner of her storage room. This trunk contained clothes from her teaching days, items too precious with memory to discard but too humble to ever wear again. She pulled out a faded brown dress that had once been her everyday outfit, worn so many times that the fabric was thin in places. She found old sandals with cracked leather straps. She located a torn shawl that had belonged to her mother. Holding these items in her hands, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. These clothes represented a life she had left behind, a simplicity she sometimes missed, a world where people valued her for herself rather than her title. Today, she would return to that world, but even lower, even simpler, testing whether goodness still existed in the hearts of her people. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to dress. The transformation took longer than she expected. She removed her silk nightgown and put on the old brown dress, feeling the rough fabric against skin that had grown accustomed to the finest materials. She wrapped the torn shawl around her shoulders, covering her hair in a way that made her look older, more weathered. She washed off all traces of the expensive cream she usually wore, letting her natural face show every line, every mark of age. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Without the crown, without the royal bearing, without the fine clothes, she looked like any elderly woman the world had forgotten. She looked poor, tired, desperate. She looked exactly like what she needed to be. To complete the disguise, she found a small wooden bowl that she would use for collecting coins. She took a walking stick from the corner. She deliberately smudged dirt on her face and hands. When she was finished, even her own attendants would struggle to recognize her. The woman in the mirror was not Queen Margaret. She was just another beggar the world would ignore. She left her chambers through a private door that few people knew existed, a passage built long ago for emergencies. It led through narrow corridors to a small exit at the back of the palace grounds, far from the main gates where guards stood watch. As she walked through these hidden passages, her heart beat fast with nervousness and excitement. She felt like she was doing something forbidden, even though her intentions were pure. Near the exit, she encountered Martha, her oldest and most trusted attendant, who had served her since her wedding day. Martha had been awake early, as always, and she gasped when she saw the queen in beggar's clothing. "Your Majesty," she whispered urgently, looking around to make sure no one else was near. "What are you doing? This is not safe. Please reconsider." Queen Margaret touched the old woman's arm gently. "Martha, I must do this," she said softly. "Tell no one where I have gone. If anyone asks, say I have traveled to the monastery for private prayer and meditation. Say I will return in a few days. Trust me in this." Martha's eyes filled with tears of worry, but she had served Queen Margaret long enough to know when arguing was useless. "Please be careful, Your Majesty," she said, her voice shaking. "The streets are not kind to the poor and vulnerable. Please return safely." Queen Margaret nodded, squeezed Martha's hand once more, then slipped through the exit into the early morning darkness. Outside the palace walls, the world felt different. The air smelled of smoke from cooking fires and garbage from the streets. The ground was uneven, not like the smooth palace floors. Already, she could hear the city waking up. Vendors were beginning to set up their stalls. Workers hurried toward their jobs. Children in worn uniforms walked toward school. No one paid any attention to the old woman in ragged clothes walking slowly along the road. She was invisible, exactly as she needed to be. For the first time in decades, Queen Margaret was anonymous, and it felt both frightening and strangely liberating. She made her way toward the central market, the busiest part of the city, where people from all walks of life intersected throughout the day. The market was already bustling when she arrived. Traders called out their prices. Customers haggled over vegetables and cloth. The smell of frying food mixed with the odor of fish and spices. Queen Margaret found a spot near the main entrance where many people passed, and she sat down slowly on the ground, her back against a wall. She placed her wooden bowl in front of her and waited. Within minutes, she began to understand what it meant to be invisible. People walked past without looking at her. Some stepped around her bowl as if it were trash blocking their path. A well-dressed businessman actually wrinkled his nose in disgust as he passed, pulling his young son closer as if poverty might be contagious. A group of women walked by, talking loudly about their shopping plans, and one of them nearly kicked the bowl with her expensive shoe. "Watch where you sit, old woman." The woman snapped without breaking a conversation. Queen Margaret said nothing, just watched and learned. This was what she had come to see. This was a reality for those society deemed worthless. Hours passed slowly in the hot sun. Queen Margaret's back began to ache from sitting on the hard ground. Her throat grew dry and scratchy. A few people had dropped small coins in her bowl, tossing them without looking at her face, without acknowledging her humanity. Most people ignored her completely. She watched the endless parade of humanity pass by, seeing things she had never truly seen from her palace windows. She saw how the wealthy spoke to vendors, demanding lower prices as if the poor had no right to earn a living. She saw young people laughing at an old man who stumbled, making jokes instead of offering help. She saw a mother slap her housemaid in public for a small mistake, her face twisted with anger. Each scene taught her something painful about the world her son would govern someday. The cruelty was not always obvious or violent. Often it was simply indifference, the casual disregard for human dignity that people showed when they thought no one important was watching. Queen Margaret's heart grew heavier with each passing hour, wondering if she would find any genuine kindness at all. A particularly painful moment came when a group of teenage girls walked past, laughing loudly about something on their phones. They were dressed in expensive clothes, their hair styled perfectly, their makeup flawless. One of them glanced at Queen Margaret and made a disgusted face. "Look at that old beggar," she said loudly to her friends. "So dirty and pathetic. She probably spent her whole life being lazy. Now she expects hard-working people to give her money for nothing." Her friends laughed, agreeing loudly. "My mother says beggars are just scammers," another girl added. "They pretend to be poor but actually have houses and money hidden somewhere. We should never give them anything." A third girl chimed in. "I bet she smells terrible. Imagine having to sit next to someone like that on a bus. I would literally die." They walked away still laughing, their cruel words hanging in the air. Queen Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. These girls were the same age as many of the young women who had come to meet Prince Thomas. They looked beautiful and modern on the outside, but their hearts were cold, lacking any real compassion or empathy. They would never be suitable as future queens. As the afternoon wore on, Queen Margaret considered giving up and returning to the palace. She had seen enough cruelty to confirm her worst suspicions about human nature. Perhaps genuine kindness was too rare to find. Perhaps she was searching for something that no longer existed in this modern world where everyone calculated the value of every action. She was preparing to stand up, her body stiff and painful, when she heard a soft voice beside her. "Grandmother, are you all right? You have been sitting here all day in the hot sun without water." Queen Margaret looked up, her tired eyes focusing on the face of a young woman who had knelt down beside her. The girl was perhaps 23 or 24 years old, wearing a simple, faded dress that showed signs of many washings. Her shoes were old but clean. Her face was kind, with gentle eyes that held genuine concern. "I am managing, my child," Queen Margaret replied, her voice rough from hours of not speaking. "Just tired and thirsty." The girl immediately opened a small cloth bag she was carrying. She pulled out a plastic bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich. "Please take this," the girl said, offering both items with a shy smile. "I bought them for my lunch, but you need them more than I do. You cannot sit here all day without eating or drinking anything." Queen Margaret's heart began to beat faster. This was different. This was genuine. There were no cameras, no audience, no one to impress. Just a poor girl sharing her own lunch with someone she thought was even poorer. "What is your name, my child?" the Queen asked softly, accepting the water gratefully. The girl sat down on the ground beside her, not seeming to care about dirtying her already worn dress. "My name is Mercy, grandmother," she replied. "I work at the small restaurant across the street. I saw you this morning when I came to work, and I have been watching you all day. No one has helped you properly, and it made me sad." She paused, looking down at her hands. I know what it is like to need help and receive none. I lost both my parents when I was young. Life has not been easy for me either. Queen Margaret studied Mercy carefully, seeing beyond the faded dress and worn shoes. She saw a young woman who had known pain but had not let it make her bitter. She saw kindness that was natural and unforced, flowing from a genuinely good heart. You are very compassionate, Mercy, she said quietly. Not many people your age would stop to help an old beggar. Mercy smiled again, a smile that lit up her whole face despite the sadness in her story. My mother taught me, before she died, that we should treat everyone with dignity, she explained. She said that God sees no difference between rich and poor, powerful and weak. She said we should help others simply because it is right, not because we will get something in return. Queen Margaret felt warmth spreading through her chest. These were the exact values she had been searching for. These were the principles that made a good person, a good wife, a good future queen. She wanted to know more about this remarkable young woman who had appeared like an answer to prayer. As they talked, the queen noticed other small actions that revealed Mercy's character. When a small child dropped his toy nearby, Mercy picked it up and returned it with a kind word to the mother. When an elderly vendor struggled with heavy boxes, she stood and helped without being asked. Over the next 3 days, Queen Margaret returned to the same spot in the market, and each day Mercy came to sit with her during her lunch break. They talked about many things. Mercy shared her story about losing her parents, working hard at a restaurant, and dreaming of someday continuing her education. She spoke without self-pity or bitterness, simply stating fact about her life while maintaining a spirit of hope and gratitude. I am lucky, grandmother, she said on the second day. I have health, I have work, and I still have dreams. Many people have much less. Queen Margaret was amazed by this perspective. Here was a girl who had every reason to be angry at life, yet she spoke of being lucky. Here was someone who owned almost nothing, yet she shared what little she had. The queen's conviction grew stronger with each conversation. This was the woman she had been searching for. This was a heart that could stand beside her son. But she needed to be certain. She needed one more test. On the third day, Queen Margaret pretended to feel faint from the heat. She allowed herself to slump against the wall, breathing heavily, her hand pressed to her chest. Within moments, Mercy was at her side, having seen the collapse from inside the restaurant. "Grandmother, what is wrong?" she cried, her face filled with genuine fear. "Please, let me help you. You need to get out of the sun. You need water and rest." Other people walked past, glancing briefly but not stopping. No one else offered help. But Mercy did not hesitate. She tried to lift the queen, her thin arms straining with the effort. "My manager will be angry," she said, more to herself than to the queen. "I am not supposed to leave during work hours. But I cannot leave you like this. Come, let me take you to the restaurant. You can rest in the back room." Queen Margaret was moved almost to tears. This girl was willing to risk her job, possibly her only source of income, to help a beggar she barely knew. That single action told the queen everything she needed to know about Mercy's character. "No, child," Queen Margaret said, recovering slightly. "I will be fine. I do not want you to lose your job because of me." Mercy shook her head firmly. "Grandmother, some things are more important than a job. You are more important than my manager's anger." She managed to help the queen stand and began walking her slowly toward the restaurant. But before they reached it, Queen Margaret stopped. "Mercy," she said gently, "I must tell you something. I have not been completely honest with you." Mercy looked confused but concerned. "What do you mean, grandmother?" The queen reached up and slowly removed the torn shawl from her head, revealing her face more clearly. She stood straighter, letting her natural royal bearing show through the disguise. "My name is not what I told you," she said softly. "I am Queen Margaret." Mercy's face went completely pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her legs began to shake. "Your Majesty," she finally whispered, immediately dropping to her knees on the dainty ground. "I did not know. Please forgive me for speaking so casually. Please forgive me for treating you like a human being." Queen Margaret finished gently. "That is exactly what I wanted, Mercy. I disguised myself because I needed to see people's true hearts. I needed to find someone whose kindness did not depend on crowns or titles or potential rewards." She reached down and helped Mercy stand, holding the trembling girl's hands in her own. "For 3 days I have sat in this market. I have been ignored, insulted, and treated as if I were invisible. But you, without knowing who I was, showed me compassion. You shared your food, your time, your concern. You were willing to risk your job to help me. That is the heart I have been searching for." Mercy's eyes filled with tears of shock and confusion. "I do not understand, Your Majesty. Why would a queen test people this way?" Queen Margaret smiled softly. "Because I am looking for a wife for my son, and I needed to find someone whose goodness is genuine, not performed. Come with me to the palace. Mercy, there is someone I want you to meet." The walk to the palace felt surreal to Mercy. One moment she had been a poor restaurant worker. The next moment she was walking beside the queen, being led toward the royal palace. People in the street began to recognize Queen Margaret as she removed more of her disguise, and they stared in shock and confusion. News spread quickly through the market. The queen was disguised as a beggar. The whispers followed them all the way to the palace gates. When they arrived, guards bowed deeply, their faces showing complete bewilderment at seeing their queen in beggar's clothing. Martha rushed forward, crying with relief, "Your Majesty, thank God you are safe." Queen Margaret embraced the old woman. "I am fine, Martha, and I found what I was looking for." She turned to Mercy, who stood frozen with fear and amazement. "Come inside, child. Your life is about to change." Inside the palace, Prince Thomas was waiting, having been summoned by his mother's message. When he saw the frightened girl in faded clothes standing beside his mother, he understood immediately. His mother had found someone special. Over the following weeks, Mercy remained at the palace as a guest, not a servant. Queen Margaret insisted that she be treated with respect and given time to adjust to her new surroundings. Prince Thomas and Mercy were introduced properly, and slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Thomas appreciated her honesty and humility. Mercy admired his kindness and wisdom. They took walks in the palace gardens, talking about their different lives, their hopes, their fears. Queen Margaret watched their friendship deepen into something more, and her heart filled with peace. She had kept her promise to Frederick. She had found a woman whose heart was true. 6 months later, the kingdom celebrated a royal wedding. Prince Thomas stood beside Mercy, who wore a simple but elegant white gown. As they exchanged vows, Queen Margaret remembered the beggar sitting in the market dust and the poor girl who had shared her lunch without expecting anything in return. That moment of pure kindness had led to this moment of joy. In the crowd, wealthy families who had presented their daughters watched with jealousy and disbelief. But the common people cheered loudest of all. They saw themselves in Mercy's story. They saw hope that goodness still mattered in a world that often valued only wealth and status. And somewhere in her heart, Queen Margaret heard her late husband's voice saying, "Well done, my love. Well done." Thank you for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to Heritage Stories channel for more inspiring stories.